time. I usually run late in my presentations, so we'll try to keep the content within the bounds and get you on your way to get your morning coffee. First of all, thank you very much for waking up. I know it's hard after the party last night. I don't know if you got into the Vegas night. I sat down on the first table and lost all my money right away. Luckily it was pretend. And that's why I don't go to the tables in Vegas when I do the SharePoint conference there as well. So welcome everyone. My name is Veli Mattivanamo. Don't worry, just call me Veli. Everyone does. I'm originally from Finland, hence the name, but as you can see from the accent, I've been around mainly in Ireland for the last 15 years or so, and luckily enough I was relocated here just the start of this year. I'm going to be doing a talk around information governance and records management for Microsoft SharePoint. Majority of the talk I kind of focus around lessons learned, or I guess less politically correctly said, mistakes made. And I made plenty of mistakes in my last 11 or 12 years or so with SharePoint. I started back in year 2000 with Tahoe Beta 2, and I was actually the lead architect of HP's internal knowledge management systems. We ended up over 8 years or so that I was leading that program, deploying to about 250,000 active users around the world, with about 50,000 contractors around the world. And I usually like to say I made enough mistakes to write 3 books about it, which is certainly true, and that'll be much of the backstory around this presentation as well. Even though we talk about records management, information governance, I like to talk about the journey that I took, certainly on this field, and the typical ways that, you know, I deployed SharePoint originally, what I discovered soon afterwards, and how I tried to address it over and over and over again, until I kind of found a solution that somewhat worked, and we got out of a bit of a hairy situation. So I'll talk about that throughout the journey itself. After that, I'll touch upon some of the basics on what SharePoint 2013, SharePoint Online nowadays brings to the table, and what you can do with third-party technologies on top of that. I won't focus too much on the technology in this session itself, though if you're interested in any of the products or SharePoint's internal, more technical features, I'm more than happy to talk afterwards at length about any technology itself, but I thought first thing in the morning, let's not deep dive too much into technology, but keep within, you know, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and some of the lessons learned along the way. Before I talk about that journey that I took, I like to kind of flip things around and talk about, or show you rather, a demo of what the end vision may look like in the information governance records management world itself. And today I'm actually going to attempt to show you 2 demos. I say attempt, I'm plugged into the conference wireless, and yesterday I noticed some of the speakers were having some issues, but let's see how we go along. So usually what I do in this stage is, and what I'll show you is a bit of a journey of a typical SharePoint system. I'm going to use in the first demo, and I should really make sure that we are sharing between 2 screens, so we duplicate. There we go. That could have been awkward. Right, so what I like to show you is a typical SharePoint process, and this is very much what people, after a while, after you move from document management to other things that SharePoint can offer you, you focus around a business process and automating that business process. And that is really great at what SharePoint does, and truly where the value of the platform can be realized. It's more than just team collaboration, more than just document management, more than just sharing that. It's actually being able to take that whole process and put it into a managed environment, where as part of working with this system, people happen to create documents and they happen to share those documents. And in this case, they happen to do the right thing from the corporate perspective, i.e. make sure that the right items are captured and recordized and kept for long-term preservation and so on and so forth. So this is a very typical SharePoint site, and I'll deconstruct this demo afterwards as we move throughout the session. But this is a very typical SharePoint 2013 site. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to make the text slightly bigger, and we're going to focus on the areas here. Hopefully people at the back can see a little bit. It's not important to see everything just now. Essentially here we're focusing on taking a business process, in this case a very simple, simplistic case of complaints management, where we have a fictional scenario in a telco situation, and this demo I originally did for a telecommunications company, where they receive complaints over the phone. They're capturing that phone call and that complaint. They're processing it. As part of processing that case, they essentially capture correspondence to do with that. And after they've dealt with the case, they issue a letter to a customer, right? So I'm going to walk you through the process here, and we'll see a little bit what happens behind the scene. This is the first demo is going to use HP Records Manager, or TRIM as you may know it, as the backend. The second demo that I'm going to do afterwards will show you a bit of RecordPoint, but don't worry, we'll cover what SharePoint can do out of the box, and I'll show you that later on in the session, right? So in the very quick case here, what we'll do is a call center operative can go in and create a new case file. In this case, they just navigate to an infopath form. In this case, nothing fancy. Here we'll capture the title. Just put in a name there. And while I type in the fields and try to make sure that I don't make any mistakes, the reason why I'm capturing real information here becomes apparent as we move throughout the demo itself, because I'm actually going to use this information later on in the letter that I'm going to create. Right, and we're going to select head office. We're going to assign a case officer. Let's see, Grace. And here we're just going to say and filed complaint, right? So far we're just using what's out of the box in SharePoint. Don't get me started on the forum story, but here we're using obviously InfoPath, as you may have attended some of the forum sessions. InfoPath is around until 2013 or so. But there are other forms technologies that will be coming around, and you can already take use of. So I'm going to go ahead and look at my cases that I've just created, and while the internet here catches up, what we'll see is the item that I created got created in a custom list. We captured the form's data, the email, the name, the number, the business section, the case officer, and so on and so forth. Now, what you might obviously see here and think about from your perspective as well is what we've just captured is the telephone correspondence with the customer that needs to be managed as a record. And as a system operator, as a customer service staff, I don't necessarily know that I need to do that. I'm concerned and focused around what my job is, i.e. corresponding with the customers, taking their details and dealing with the case itself. So what the friendly records and information managers have done as part of this business process and this site itself is that they've defined that actually any complaint that gets lodged into the system itself has to be captured and managed as a record in the back-end systems. So if I go ahead and now look at the management details of this item itself, and once it actually loads up, what we'll see is that the item has been automatically captured. by HP Records Manager in this case. It has been assigned a record number, COM14-5, and it's been declared in a container within a record system. Now, it's not really important what the end record system here is, and I'll show you all this functionality, what I've done so far, pretty much working on every technology that's there. What's really important here, and what I'm going to talk a lot about, is the fact that me as a call center or customer service staff didn't have to make any conscious decision to declare this item as a record or to say that this needs to be kept for X number of years. It was part of my job to simply log the case and take that case forward and actually deal with that case itself. So I'm going to switch over just for a second to have a look at what this looks like in TRIM. And if you've never seen TRIM, don't worry. I'm not going to spend too much time in here. What I will show you though is that here we have an item, and if I open up this item itself, so we have COM14-5, what we will see is that we have the SharePoint fields, the fields from the form, captured and managed as part of this record item as well. So we have the case status, we have the customer names, we have the emails, we have the addresses, we have the history of the case, and then what's really important from a SharePoint perspective as well, we've captured the whole audit history that has to do with this item itself. I'm just going to pop on a magnifying glass here as well. So at the top we see a little bit is that we captured the actual SharePoint audit history as part of this record itself. Because in most cases there are workflows attached, and a workflow can modify the item, and sometimes it's important to make sure what action and what data and what field was modified by a workflow rather than a person. And as we see, all of that information is captured and managed. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close my magnifying glass there. So here we just see that the item has been captured and managed and is now an item in TRIM itself. Now, what usually happens in systems such as this in SharePoint is a great system that runs built-in workflows, and you can trigger those workflows to occur on an event, such as item created itself. So here is part of the case itself. We were assigned a record number, if you remember, COM14-5, and as part of that, a workflow went and created a correspondence folder to do with this case itself. And here we see COM14-5 was created 4 minutes ago. So what happened behind the scenes is this is the truth both with RecordPoint, TRIM, and SharePoint itself, is that you can take that record number that you declared in the official system and surface it back into the business process that was that initiated that initial action as well. So here we've taken the record number and we've created a folder for the correspondence part of that. And as part of that correspondence folder, I can do all the things you'd expect me to do in a normal SharePoint site, since it is just a SharePoint site. I can go ahead and, for example, drag and drop documents that are due with that case. I can, in my Outlook, while that finishes, I can use any number of third-party add-ons. Unfortunately, Outlook is the one product from Microsoft Office Suite that doesn't save easily to SharePoint, but there are third parties, one such as One Place Mail, which is downstairs as well, one of the sponsors of the event. And here I've used the free version of One Place Mail, which allows me to essentially say any one of these particular items, I can go ahead and copy to a SharePoint location, and instead of copying into an existing one, I can just pick my location here, complaints, customer correspondence, and we have 14-5. And I can just say that this item here needs to, this email is relating to that case, and let's go ahead and file it. Now, of course, if you were running, let's say, TRIM, you could use the Office plugins and add-ons and so on and so forth. Traditionally, that wasn't a decision that a large enterprises made to actually roll out the Office add-ins for, let's say, TRIM, because it required the whole client to be installed. Now, the story has slightly changed, but nevertheless, most organizations may still choose that their information workers, their people on the field don't really need the add-ons, and they don't really want to deploy that version itself. They are familiar working with SharePoint, and as we're part of an overall business process, everything that I essentially do, it should be, and it is, hopefully, you see my point, it is invisible to the user that they're dealing with records at all. They're dealing with the case, that's what their business, that's what their job is, and in this case, they've logged a few items against this case in the correspondence folder. So we have the email message, we have the document, and so on and so forth. And everything that I do gets logged into the backend TRIM system, and we have the email properties, who sent the documents, and so on and so forth, all brought into the records management system. Just simply by the user using the system, just as they always have to complete their transaction. So just to finish and round off the demo, in this case what we will do is quite typical to SharePoint systems, once again, is that you incorporate these forms and these workflows into the system itself. So in this case, the customer service representative has gone in and dealt with the case itself, and here they can say, I've resolved the issue and will proceed to issue a letter to the customer. So we'll go ahead and respond to the customer itself, and once again, using nothing but built-in SharePoint, we're closing the case, and as part of that action, it triggers now an action to create a letter, which is to be issued to the customer itself. So if I navigate to the customer letters folder, what we see is we have the customer letter that was just created. What I'm going to go ahead is, while Word thinks about this for a minute, I'm going to go ahead and open that document and essentially show you that everything that I've captured so far, including the records numbers and so on and so forth, are actually able to be used within a Word document itself. And this is why SharePoint is really good at taking the whole business process, not just the documents, but everything around it, because you can actually use that data that was captured as part of that original form in a Word document as well. And here we've simply used a feature of Word called Quick Parts to expose metadata from a SharePoint list and take that into the document itself. So here we see that my name, number, my address, and everything was captured. Just going to go ahead and write a little bit, just show that it's not all smoke and mirrors. So I'm going to go ahead and essentially add a little bit about that case, and as part of that processing, the document has now been saved into SharePoint. And since this was a letter that was issued to a customer, it is an important piece of correspondence and information that needs to be captured and stored as part of the system. So just to show you, as you may already know, as part of performing that particular action, my customer letter has been captured in the end records management system as well. And everything that I just did and wrote is now preserved for long-term archival and disposition based on the rules that the records managers have set, and so on and so forth. Just to look at the properties as well, the properties that were part of that, made up that Word document, the customer address, the name, the phone number, were all captured as part of this letter as well. All right? Now, there's a little bit more to this demo, which I may return to later on, because actually this integration has so far gone one way. You can go the other way as well. And actually the template that you just saw here is actually a template that was managed and is currently resides in TRIM itself. And what we've done is expose that document back to SharePoint and used it as a template. But I won't get to that just yet, because what I do want to show you is a separate, different kind of a process that happens quite a lot in SharePoint itself. And after that, we'll actually get to the session and talk a little bit about what's been happening. A second thing that a lot of people roll out SharePoint for is typical project collaboration, right? Everybody does projects, right, in one way or another. They may not be official MS project managed projects, but usually what it involves is a number of discussions, collaborations, documents that happen as part of that. In this case, this fictional company has rolled out a project management framework, as part of which they use SharePoint to manage those projects. And what they've done is they've essentially created a template where a user can self-provision a site. It's okay to self-provision sites, though I'll horror and tell you nightmare stories about that in just a minute. But in this case, we are creating a self-provision site. We have a project site template, and of course I could make sure that this was the only option available to the user. I didn't have time to set that up in the demo itself. But here essentially we're creating a new site. A user is self-provisioning it. I'm just going to set up a few of the options and go ahead and I'm actually going to create that site itself. So while the site is created, the idea here being is that we tell the users that, hey, we have this great new project management site template. You don't have to spend, an hour or two on setting up your site and your folder structures and your web parts and all the rest. Just use our self-provisioning process, and as part of that, you get a site at the end of it, right? As hopefully the internets allow. What happens behind the scenes is obviously the site is now being created and provisioned based on that framework. Now, while that's creating, I will show you that this system obviously is using another third-party add-on called RecordPoint for SharePoint. And behind the scenes, while the site is being created, what we've done is we've set up a RecordPoint long-term archival records management system, to where we've created a couple of rules, and I'll go to those in a minute since our site has now been provisioned. So essentially this is a very typical SharePoint collaboration site where we have a number of lists. We have a COO who is very focused around risks and defining risks and what risks are and so on and so forth. So I took some of his terminology and rolled it up. Essentially what's happening here is that on any typical project site, you probably have project risks, you have issues, you have variations in this case, and you have a number of documents, and you have different types of documents. You may have project documents that are just referenced, the original, let's say, customer a request, you have status reports, but you're also probably managing a contract of some type, and you're managing design documents of some description. So in here, for example, in my contract management area itself, actually I'm just going to do it from the home page itself, we have customer provided contract documents. So as part of setting up this site, normally the project manager would, for example, say that, okay, the RFP that the customer provided us originally needs to be uploaded and managed as part of that site. As part of our project management documentation, let me go back, as part of our customer provided documents, we may have a design document of some sort. Actually, that was a project status report, that's okay. So these are kind of reference documents, not really important from that perspective, but as part of the actual design of itself, we may also decide that we have a technical architecture document that is now ready to be submitted to the customer as well. So as part of kind of collaborating, using the site to share and work with your colleagues, this is the type of stuff that SharePoint is really built for, right? Nothing too exciting there. What I do want to show you, though, is that me just working with SharePoint just again, like I normally do. I'm trying to click the dots. Essentially what is happening behind the scenes is that items which are, for example, of financial contract nature, in this case, just by the fact that I put them into the contract documents library, are now being captured once again automatically without me as a user providing any action whatsoever. What we see once again is this time from RecordPoint, we have the record numbers, the types, and the classifications, and the disposal actions, the actions due, and so on and so forth, all managed for me. Because what I did is I dragged and dropped a document into a particular folder. And once again, and this is not something that, as you saw, this was a site that I just set up, right? So in this case, the template that had been provided to me by the system administrators to fast-track my process of going ahead and actually provisioning a site and getting all this new functionality as part of it, as part of that, the records administrators had said to the guys, hey, anything of a contractual nature needs to be captured in RecordPoint. And you don't have to worry about it, because actually we've created all the rules for you. The only thing you need to do is to ensure that you've enabled and called it this. And as part of that template, the user has to take no action whatsoever except to interact with this SharePoint collaboration site just as they would. And just as we see, if we now go into RecordPoint and look at the record browser itself, the documents that I've go ahead and dragged and dropped have been captured and been assigned record numbers. As you see, I dragged and dropped 3 documents, 2 of which were captured. That's because in our scenario here, as in many scenarios, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, we had reference documents, contract documents, and design documents. 2 of those types of documents, or in this case, they're just libraries. They're just document libraries, document folders. 2 of those types of folders actually were official of nature, and therefore we had defined that design and contracts need to be captured. Reference, not so much, unless a user consciously makes the decision to declare it, which is available to you, of course, from the RecordPoint ribbon item, and well, from kicking off a workflow, for example, right? So that's a very kind of a long look at what's possible. I guess what I'm going to go into as we go back into the session itself and start talking through the slides and deconstruct what we've just seen there, is that my belief is, and this is a personal thing, I don't know if you agree or not, but as a user, if you ask users to classify and declare records in your organization, I don't know if your experience on this, in my experience, it doesn't happen, right? Or if it does happen, it happens with a lot of complaining and a lot of grumbling and a lot of excuses and so on and so forth, right? So what I tried to show you there is the kind of end vision of, if you take a little bit of time, in this case, for example, with RecordPoint, to set up those templates that define what types of information and give something back to the users to actually, dangle the carrot in front of them and say, hey, if you use our project site template, we create you the folder structures, the nice look and feel, the risk register, everything that you can dream of with the click of a button. What you may or may not actually tell them is that, hey, by using this template, you're also doing the right thing. Users are less concerned about it. In a lot of organizations, but less concerned about doing the right thing, the more concerned about getting on with it and getting home at the end of the day, right? So with a little bit of setting up, and I can show you this time allowing towards the end of it as we deconstruct it, with a couple of clicks of the button, for example, in the RecordPoint system itself, I've defined a workflow that captures any items that are deposited in a particular folder, a particular library, or created as part of a specific template. Right. So that's a kind of a long look at a vision. Hopefully that made a bit of sense and agree with it a little bit. Let's roll back. Right. And let me tell you about a story. A story in my case about deploying SharePoint. Now, this is quite a typical story, as I've come to realize afterwards when I moved off from the internal HP team of managing a couple of 100,000 users and SharePoint around it. I've come to realize that this is a journey that everyone pretty much exclusively takes to do with SharePoint as well. But just to set out the scene, we set out in 2001 to deploy collaboration to the enterprise. We wanted an easy-to-use MS Office friendly tool that we didn't have to do a lot of training and upskilling for. We just wanted a tool that looked and felt like Office, that users could go ahead and do their thing. We enabled self-site creation because we thought it was a brilliant feature to be able to encourage users to use this new document collaboration system where items were now being version controlled and managed and so on and so forth, instead of provisioning those old file shares that we had lying around all over the place and nobody knew and where they were and what to do with them. So we went out and rolled out self-site creation and told the enterprise, in this case it was the services organization, about 23,000 users, hey, here it is, go crazy. We didn't say go crazy, but we didn't say not to go crazy, so I guess that was implied. We were quite forward thinking because we realized that actually, as part of the organization, a lot of people manage a lot of records and those have to be captured, and there was an official policy and a guideline on where to go and document them at the time and where to drop and drop the official documents and what to do with those, right? So we linked to that policy on the self-site creation page. About 6 months after this, I got a call from HP Managed Services in Canada asking me about, hey, what's our SLA and what's our backup policy? They've just used our Create Self-Site Creation and they've rolled the whole Canada Managed Services documentation, customer system documentation to our system. And as, by the way, as part of our commitment to our customers, or HP Canada's commitment to the customers, they had to create an SLA of $10,000 per hour that their documents are not available to them in any such case that the system may go down. What, of course, I had neglected to tell them is that we were running on a single server, non-clustered, non-load balanced environment in a Class C data center at the back of Colorado somewhere, and no, we did not have an SLA, and what is an SLA kind of thing, right? Imagine their surprise and imagine my surprise when they actually wanted to keep on using this platform. But this is quite a typical thing. You deploy out the collaboration, you set up self-site creation, you don't really know how it's going to be used, right? In our case, it was used tremendously. We were growing at a rate of 500 team sites per month. And we were running out of CPU and disk space and I/O because we had no SANs or anything like that at the time. But it was a very successful collaboration deployment. Of course, what that led to is the growth at the unsustainable rate, and that was certainly me back in 2002. In fact, I did a talk on this in Decade 2002 or so around SharePoint sprawl at the time. I was having daily conference calls with Joel Olson, who was part of then SharePoint engineering and was actually was part of the internal Microsoft SharePoint deployment team and was the only one at Microsoft who understood performance at the time. So we were trying to triage the system to try to get it back on its wheels. What we had led to is this growth at unsustainable rate, which meant a lot of degradation. And guess what? That policy link that I put into the site where they go and create the sites themselves to say, hey, if you put in records to this system, there's a policy and you should drag and drop them. Well, you should save them to your hard drive, then you should open up, document them, and then you should upload a document, and you should fill out the metadata of this long. Guess how many of those were actually done? Not a whole lot, right? So we knew we had to do something, and this is a very typical way that most organizations and since found deal with it. Of course, you go into this triage mode, and you know, we had a big project site, and we were talking with Microsoft about how to scale up farms. This was just pre-2003, when, I don't know if you ever used 2001, there was no high availability in 2001, right? In 2003, the farm model finally came to play, and we had a lot of input into what that farm model looked like, because at that point we were running at about 700 sites per month uptake. And after, you know, we realized that we needed to do something, we went out and scaled out our existing farm. We planned and built new infrastructure. We were running 7 farms around the world, and you know, doing all of this, trying to keep up with the curve. And what happened in about 2006, so this was 2 or 3 years afterwards, we were now growing at a rate of 1,000 sites per month, and we were closing in on 60 terabytes of data in our SharePoint farm. And this was in SharePoint 2003, right? We had moved to, you know, geo-redundancy and all of this kind of stuff. We put in a lot of new policies around self-site creation and so on and so forth. We implemented governance policies, right? We had a usage policy for our sites. We created site templates. We put in automatic site deletion, which informed the user every 30 days after their site hadn't been touched that, hey, do you still need to keep this site? If not, we'll automatically delete it. Click here to delete it for us, please. Thank you. Please delete our site. Try to get rid of it somehow. We define all of those policies. We restricted our quotas for the first time. We had no quotas for the first 5 years or so. We defined quotas, and we set up restrictions for self-site creation and so on and so forth. A year later, in 2007, we were growing at a rate of 1,500 sites per month, and we had passed 96 terabytes of data. Because what happened is, even with all of those governance policies and rules around self-site creation and so on and so forth, guess what? A user gets a mail saying your site will be deleted unless you say that you still need it. Pretty much 99% of the users click the link to say, no, I don't want my site deleted, without even, you know, probably looking at the site and the information in there. Because what we realized is that most people who create the site were the project managers or the project administrators or the group administrators. They simply were, they understood what the site was going to be used for, but they had no clue how the users were using the information in the site in the first place. So their first instinct was, ooh, I don't know. I can't delete that. I don't know what people have uploaded there. I might need to keep that. And since there was no penalty as such, of course we were charging the business units at a higher rate, but they didn't really see, you know, the dollars coming out and the pain for me from a system administrator point of view. Managing 96 terabytes of SQL data was great fun. They didn't know that, and they didn't understand the context of the information that was stored in it. So they went around and simply clicked next. Which leads us to a very typical SharePoint challenge. And I don't know if this resonates or not, or perhaps, you know, this is just me dreaming about it. But normally a SharePoint site lacks the context and the metadata that describes the information that is stored there. And this was very much the case in our environment back in the day. There was little to no library or folder structure. Well, there was shared documents, right? And that's about it. And somebody may have created a few folders and so on and so forth. Classifications, to say that they were basic at best would be an understatement. There had no classification schemes whatsoever, because the user was, you know, using this it was rolled out for collaboration. What do I need to classify documents that I'm collaborating on, right? There were no information lifecycle policies. We didn't understand what data was stored in those sites, and therefore it was staying there forever itself. So we realized that we as an IT provided the governance framework that managed how sites were created and how they were supposed to be deleted, but we didn't really understand the information itself. And since we didn't understand the information itself, the first instinct and the only thing you can do as an IT to, you know, who has to worry a little bit about, in our case, lawsuits and so on and so forth, we kept everything. And that was quite unsustainable. Obviously, back in 2009, 2010 or so, HP bought TRIM, and I like to think that we had something to do with it, because our internal SharePoint infrastructure was such a mess that actually it was cheaper to buy the company than to license 200,000 users. That's not true, of course. I forgot this session is being recorded. I didn't really say that. But, right? I was quickly branded as an information hippie by the team itself, which is fair enough. I was kind of an hippie. Though back in the day of WikiLeaks and so on and so forth, it suddenly became unfashionable to be an information hippie, which you certainly don't want to be nowadays either. Right? So we knew that we had to do something about it. And the next logical step, really, which brings us to the topic of the day, is the information governance. So unless you understand the files and the content that you're managing within these sites that you're rolling out to your enterprise, unless you have a little bit, you put in a little bit of thought around where and how these things are created, you can't ever get rid of it. And if that is certainly, as an IT pro side, you want to get rid of stuff, because you don't want to be managing 90 plus terabytes. Actually, last time I talked to the guys, I think it was like 150 terabytes, right? It was 96 terabytes back in 2009, so you can kind of think where it's grown on from since. But obviously, where you want to go is you want to understand what is the information that is managed within the site, so it can be more accurately and correctly managed, archived, disposed, deleted, whatever language you want to use in there. The main thing is that unless you understand the context and the information that you're storing in these sites itself, you are going to have a nightmare such as I did. Right? And that's really where the information governance definition in my talk and you know, when I like to talk about it, comes in there. It's to define the lifecycle policies for archival retention and to make the content discoverable afterwards. It's about making sure that legal, business, and records management units work together with IT to define these policies for your SharePoint environment in order to facilitate that whole lifecycle and not just to facilitate the creation of it. Being at the creation end of the sphere of an information management system is great, it's exciting at the start, it's not so fun to manage going forward. Can you guess the size of the project to bring in information policies and records management integration to farm the size of internal HPs, 96 terabytes after the fact? It wasn't fun. In fact, I don't think they're still done with it. And of course, I'm no longer part of HP. Right? It was a problem that was quite massive to tackle, right? But if you even do the basic things up front, you can skip a lot of the headaches and the nightmares that I've left and talked about. And even the most basic classification things of understanding what is a contract, what is a financial document, what is a document provided to the customer, even putting that little bits and pieces into place up front will save you a lot of work afterwards. Because the only time ever you will be able to reclassify content, by the way, is when you're doing your next migration. typically, I've not seen any organization, including internally in HP, we never did a reclassification of existing content unless it was part of a data migration. And most people, I don't know how many of you have run SharePoint environments and whatnot, most people don't do a migration of a SharePoint environment nowadays. If it's on-prem, they do an upgrade, because the upgrade story has gotten a lot better. So realistically, if you think about it today, you're on-prem using SharePoint. The next time, if you don't do something about this now, the next time you will probably have a chance of addressing it is when you're doing a migration to the cloud. And that's, you know, a controversial statement perhaps, but I believe that eventually all of you will migrate to the cloud. So we've talked a little bit about the framing, and we've looked at the tools a little bit. Just to cover off some of the tools and technologies and things that I've shown you and that I will hopefully show you in the next 10 minutes or so. In SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint Online, there are a number of records management features that are available part of the product. And I have created and rolled out records management information management system based on just the out-of-the-box SharePoint. I've done them to commercial organizations in Europe, mainly because there is little or lax legislation that defines how exactly you need to manage. What SharePoint doesn't do, it provides you the toolkit to create a records management system. It doesn't comply with or certify against any VERS or ISO standards and so on and so forth, right? If you need those, you do need to look at third-party options. But if you don't, there are a lot of features that are available out of the product for you. I will show you Content Organizer. A Content Organizer came available in SharePoint 2010. Essentially what that feature does, it allows you to create a document center to which you send files to, and based on the rules that you've created, it actually takes that file and puts it into a folder within that document center. You have document ID functions since 2010. It wasn't really touched or iterated upon in 2013 a lot, but, and I don't know if any of you have used it, it's okay on a site-by-site basis. It can't really do consistent document numbering across multiple site collections and across multiple sites without doing some kind of third-party add-ons. If you want to do that, I would recommend that you look at RecordPoint to begin with. Right? You do have location-based metadata defaults that help you with a lot of this. You can do in-place records management. And you have the option with e-discovery and holds. Now, the one thing to mention here in SharePoint Online, now we're seeing an uptake of OneDrive for Business in a lot of organizations, since it's 1 terabyte for free if you have Office 365 license. One thing to note is that even if you've implemented some records management third-party add-on or whatever, you will still probably use this e-discovery feature to discover and hold content that exists in those OneDrive for Business places, right? So it's not something to glance over. SharePoint 2013 plus brought site retention, site mailbox, and the SharePoint Online parity feature sets for a lot of these records management features. But still, like I said, the toolkit is there, but you have to define how to use that toolkit in every single business process and every single site collection that you roll out if you use the out-of-the-box option itself. Of course, a little help goes a long way. The main two products that I've shown you, demoed and focused around, and this is very much I guess what I've seen so far in the Australian market as well is that there are two main players. Obviously, RecordPoint is a great product which is built on the SharePoint platform stack itself. And the reason why I have RecordPoint and the HP Records Manager there is that both of these products also work in the cloud, right? You may have not known it, but Records Manager 8.1 was just released 2 weeks ago, and that included SharePoint Online and Azure integration capabilities. These are two of the main products that have the online capability, the hybrid scenario support, which going forward is, whether or not you know it or not, is going to be extremely important. And these are certainly the two options that I've seen a lot of uptake here in Australia with as well. I'm not going to focus too much on technology. What I will say is that RecordPoint, as I will show you, is a brilliant product because it's built on the SharePoint platform itself, which means that the administrators who are using this system, the IT pros, are familiar with everything that they see in there. And they can manage the database growth, the site collection usage, you know, the number of items and so on and so forth. It's not an extra set of skills that they have to learn. Having said that, a lot of users here especially are quite TRIM heavy, and they have years and years and years of collective experience in defining policies and rules and so on and so forth in the TRIM universe itself. And therefore, if you have that long legacy of using the TRIM product itself, the integration that now ships as part of 8.1, as you saw there, is quite transparent and very well baked into the SharePoint product itself. But it is still a separate system that you have to manage going forward, and it's a separate set of IT pros that usually manage and take care of that system as well. So in the last 5 minutes or so, or 2 minutes, I'm going to look a little bit about what's available and what we've shown so far. So one thing that I want to show you, and I need to remember to share my screen again, don't I? Right. That would help. Great. Okay. So here I have a SharePoint Online tenant. It's my own dev tenant. Essentially, in the SharePoint Admin Center in Office 365, you may have noticed, and this is available on-premise as well, you have the records management option, which essentially allows you to configure what's called a send-to connection, built in, just baked into SharePoint itself. So essentially what the idea here is that in every site across the whole SharePoint Online environment here, I want to say that my Safety Documents Archive Record Center should be available to me to send documents to. And here I can define some of the display names and so on and so forth. I've done one already here for the demo purposes. So we have Safety Documents Archive, and we have the name, and we have the location of the archive. If we look at the archive itself, this is essentially created based on the SharePoint Record Center template. And I've created a few document libraries. And as part of that, I've created a couple of rules that tell me where to route the documents that are coming to the drop-off library. And essentially what it is that the idea is that these documents here in the archive, any user can anywhere, and this is another site collection completely on the same tenant. Within the tenant itself, they can say this document or this document here needs to be sent to the Safety Documents Archive. I know it may be a little bit difficult. Let me try to zoom in a little bit, right? So, and I'm zoomed too much that I missed send to location. So here you see that we have a send to location for this documents, and I can send this to the record center itself. And when I send it to the record center, it says, are you sure you want to move this document? A link will be created to the destination document. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm taking that file, the binary itself, and I'm leaving a stub behind in this old place, but essentially the document has been moved to the long-term archival place. So here we say that, okay, it was successfully submitted, and now we see that there is a link file remaining behind for users to still navigate to that. That relies on the user to do an action. What normally happens, and what most people normally do in a SharePoint system, is they set up a document center, a kind of a document management system, for example, in this case, for safety. Because actually, when you set up one large place to hold and manage your documents in, you can benefit from the scale of utilizing this document center, for example, to define what's called an information management policy. And this is once again out of the box in SharePoint. I can say for this library, for example, I want to set up an information management policy that defines, I'll just go ahead and change the source to be this document library itself. But here, essentially what we can do, and I'll just show it to you quickly, we can add a retention stage that says anything that goes to this document library, this document center, after it's been last modified for a year. So after a year, move it to recycle bin. Yeah, that would be great, but it's not. You can transfer it to another location, right? You can permanently delete, you can start workflows, and you can set stages and so on and so forth. So essentially what we can do here is we can transfer it to that archival location, set up a policy that says that after created plus 1 year, modified plus 1 year, and so on and so forth, let's transfer it over to that location. So I will go ahead and create that policy, but essentially you get the idea here is that in a team site itself, it'd be harder to manage and create these information management policies, though you can, and that's sent to the location after a while. But normally the way we've seen it working quite successfully is, for example, for things such, for a business operation such as safety, you define a single document library where you use the new metadata-based navigation structures, and everything that happens and is uploaded and managed within this library gets automatically declared and put into the archival where it is actually going to be recordized. And as we see here, it uses the document that I sent here, the test document, now as a little padlock item to indicate that it has been recordized. And I'm running slightly out of time, so I'm going to proceed ahead, and I won't deconstruct the demos just yet. But what I will talk about is how do we get there, and what are some of the steps that I've seen work quite well. The first step that we took in HP as well was to start here, right? You need a governance policy in your organization that defines what are the types of information that you do need to manage, that you need to store, and you need to dispose of in a certain schedule, right? There is an element, and this is not by any means a small piece to be underlooked, unless you have that strategy and that definition of how do these systems work together and where does information go at what stage of its life cycle, it is very difficult to implement the technology. Usually we think that technology is the silver bullet to every problem. Well, you know, unless you know how to exactly do it, you will end up like me, redoing over and over again until you realize that, hey, something needs to stop here. There is an element of technology readiness that you need to take. Like I said, SharePoint out of the box has features and functionalities to manage records. RecordPoint is a brilliant product that works on top of the SharePoint stack if you're heavily invested into that technology, SharePoint technology itself, but that's a good way forward on that. Or upgrading to the latest TRIM 8.0 or 8.1 version from a technology readiness is what you also have to undertake. You have to think a little bit about the mapping that needs to go. So especially if you're integrating TRIM, you have to define what content types map to what record types and have that plan in place beforehand. If you're creating a RecordPoint system, you have to think about creating some of those rules to begin with, is what libraries and what content types needs to be managed with what policies. And then really the key to success is a phased implementation. So I've used this kind of concept, and it's talked a lot about in the industry around, you know, the hero implementation within the organization. So creating one, for example, that that site where we manage the complaints, creating a business process automation sites such as that transparently and automatically manages items as they're appropriate to be managed with, and showing that, using that as a showcase within your organization to tell everyone about it, right? Create that hero implementation of records management, because records management is not a really a popular topic or popular sentence to say in a lot of organizations. So what you want to focus on is showing everyone how easy and wonderful it is, and simply by using the tools of the trade to use the system to its best benefit, you are also doing the right thing, is the message there. The couple of practical steps that I want to part you with today is that don't try to become a roadblock for SharePoint collaboration implementation, right? What I mean with that is that people who put in policies around things like who can create sites, for example, often find that if you restrict site creation, what will users do? They'll create sub-sites in the site that you've already provisioned them. If you stop sub-site creation, what will they do? They will create libraries within the site that you've given them. If you stop them creating document libraries, they will create folders. If you stop that and if you put quotas around your site, what will they do? There's this great thing called Dropbox, you may have heard of it, and any other number of those, including OneDrive and Google Drive and so on and so forth. They will go out to the cloud, to the internet, and do something, right, that isn't on your platform. Right? So don't try to restrict users from using the environment. Enable them instead to better do their job, the purpose, you know, that they want to get to. And by doing that, work with the information managers to essentially define the policies and capture those records, either with the out-of-the-box, with RecordPoint or TRIM or whatever you might have in your organization. But don't become a blocker. Scope your initial implementation small. So really what I said before is that hero implementation. Use it as a showcase. And really focus on the business process automation projects first. If you take an existing business process and automate the end-to-end life cycle of that, and by doing that, capture the records, really, like the first demo that I showed to you, hopefully it opens some eyes and gets people to think about, oh yeah, that makes my job easier and I don't have to worry about all this stuff that goes around me. I'm focused on doing my work and getting on with it. And with that, really, what I do want to say is that you want to maintain your existing SharePoint experience as well. And with that, I want to thank you. I know I ran 5 minutes over time, and that's why I'm going to wrap up a little bit early. But if you have any questions at all on the technology, on the road, share some war stories, I will be certainly around. And what I'll do is I'll take questions offline, if that's okay, so that we let the next presenter set up and be ready for the 10:30 session. So enjoy the rest of your conference, and thank you very much.